I'm sorry, it's a pleasure to have the speaker with us today. She's the director of the Water Resources Research Center in Arizona. As the name very well points out, it's an arid area. It's a pretty adequate name. All the water resources of the state depends on the Colorado River and some underground water sources that changes quite a lot across the state, that it's in the southwest of the United States, bordering with Mexico and California. Water management in those areas is crucial because everything comes from irrigation. For you to have an idea, with Professor Megdal has worked in the Midwest, Israel, and Syria. Her talks and explanation as to how water is managed in these environments are very good, and it's a pleasure for us to have her here in this Aapresid Congress open source. With that, also, I want to say that Dr. Megdal has a PhD in economy from Princeton University, and it's very interesting to see how we can manage being acquainted with the natural resources and the economy of producers, how such a necessary resource can be handled. Without further ado, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, and buenos dias. My talk will be in English. I have several slides. On many of my slides, I have QR codes. If you're not able to take photos of them and want more information, just contact me afterwards, and I'd be happy to share my slides with you. It's my pleasure and honor to be here today to speak with you about a lot about water, which is so essential, obviously, for agriculture, and some of the challenges we're facing and the opportunities to change some things and have agriculture continue to be a thriving activity in the Southwest. And I'll be speaking specifically about Arizona, but I'll also be speaking more regionally about the Colorado River. It was very interesting to me that yesterday, if you were here at the session in the morning at 10 o'clock, there were so many things that were said then that really related to my presentation, but yet I made a few changes after it to show some of the commonalities that we're experiencing around the world. And I'm going to pass by this abstract slide, but what I will talk about first is just tell you a little bit about the center I direct and our work, and then I'll get into kind of the general scene for agriculture and talk about some of the things that we're doing to overcome some of the challenges of water scarcity, and more water scarcity than we'd experienced to date. So I direct the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona. We are a very outward-looking organization. We're really a bridge between the academic and non-academic, and so that's why it's so important and valued for me to be with this kind of audience of a lot of practitioners. That's where I tend to do my work. And if any of you are interested in learning more, I have the QR codes to our website and our way to subscribe to keep abreast of our webinars, our annual conference, and we work a lot in partnerships. I myself am not a farmer. I didn't grow up in a farming family, but I work with all water users in the state, and my work particularly focuses on water policy and management. So that's why this session's in the, I think, the institutional category for the conference. One of the things the center does is we publish an annual arroyo publication. I just realized I have a typo in the word arroyo there. Obviously a Spanish word that the arroyo is connected to our annual conference, and I put up some photos of the titles, cover pages of two recent ones from 2023. on Arizona's agricultural outlook, water, climate, and sustainability. And then in 2018, we had one of them conference focused, and Arroyo focused on water and irrigated agriculture. Most of our agriculture is irrigated. There's very little what we call dry land agriculture that's not dependent on irrigation. And the 2023 Arroyo, a little bit atypically, included fact sheets. And I put some images up of a couple of the fact sheets. And one of the fact sheets is on soil and soil health issues. And if you see here, you have topics of soil texture, soil and organic matter, soil improvement practices, and then conservation tillage, reducing or eliminating tillage on agricultural fields. And if any of you came to the session that I spoke at and moderated yesterday, you heard about no-till agriculture in our state, which is actually rather unusual. It's not common. But these are important issues that we're dealing with in our state as you are here. And then another one is on irrigation methods. As the speaker yesterday talked about, there's a lot of still flood irrigation or furrow irrigation going on. But there's also a lot of sprinkler, pressurized spray irrigation, and then drip irrigation is utilized, but not nearly as extensively as you might think, some of that having to do with concerns about salinity and clogging, but there's newer drip irrigation that addresses that. And then there's another one about native or indigenous agriculture. We have a lot of native nations in our state. Some of them have senior rights to surface water and other water supplies, and they grow, often using their traditional practices and their traditional crops, but they also grow they grow crops like alfalfa and maybe not traditional crops. So anyway, there's a lot of information if any of you want to take a look. Now, I am a professor, and it's hard for me to resist putting in something that sounds like a professor's slide. So here I have a slide that I use in the first meeting of the class I teach. I teach a graduate class in water policy and management in Arizona and semi-arid regions. And I put up this slide without those red arrows. I put those in for us today. And that is what you see on the ground depends on a lot of factors. And you can look at the list. They're kind of obvious things, but the legal structure determines a lot of what you see in practice. And then I put the other arrow between the politics of an area and public values. And in yesterday's session, talked about changing the narrative. If you want to change the narrative, if you want to change things, you really have to get the public, the people involved, because there is resistance to change. It is hard to bring about change. And unless the public is supportive of it, sometimes the elected decision makers won't change the structure of the institutions. And context is extremely important. And by context, I mean the water cycle context. No new water is created. It may change form. It may change quality. But I also talk about the wicked water problems context. And I'm not going to say too much about it here. But wicked problems are problems that are very big. They often are connected to bigger problems like climate change and poverty and things like that, geopolitics. And they're hard to solve. There's not just, okay, here's the solution, we'll do this, and it'll all be better. Two of the problems, the wicked problems we face, are the imbalance of water supply and demand for the Colorado River Basin in particular. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we do rely a lot on groundwater, and groundwater is invisible, although this is a photo I took that I rotated that makes it look like you're looking at the groundwater in the aquifer, but of course that's just surface water. You don't know how much you have. It takes modeling. It's very localized. And so to address these problems, to mitigate these problems, innovation and collaboration are necessary. And so a theme of this presentation is that innovation and collaboration is what are required to move forward in these challenging times. So what are the challenges? Again, we have shrinking water supplies in the Colorado River. And the Colorado River is an iconic river basin and river in the southwestern and western United States. It serves, in one way or another, the needs of 40 million people or more. It involves 7 U.S. states. I've given you the area that it covers, about 647,000 square kilometers. It's a binational or international river. It ends in Mexico, and there are states in Mexico also using that. And again, if you look at where Arizona is in the middle there, it's landlocked. We don't border an ocean or sea, and the Colorado River forms its western border. And we're in a mega drought. This photo here on the left shows the spillway at Hoover Dam, which is basically the Colorado River forms the border between Arizona and Nevada, the state of Nevada there. And back around 1999, the water was all the way up to the top. Oops, I knew I would do that. It was all the way up to the top here. And then you can see how low it is. And it's very famous, the bathtub rings. The bathtub rings are where showed where the high point was, and it just seems to be getting lower and lower. And the reservoir behind the dam is called Lake Mead. It's the largest surface storage reservoir in the United States, and it's about 30% full. It's like a bank account that we've been using over the years to meet the demand for water, and not enough has been coming in to meet the demand, so the river's been shrinking. And a lot of what's happening in the river relates to what's going on with climate. And it doesn't matter if, we have a lot of people in the United States who don't believe climate change is man-made or human-caused. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is what we're seeing happening on the river, and what we're having are much lower flows than average, so that we are in a new normal. If you look at the current 30-year average, it's much less than the prior 30 years, or the prior 60-year average. And one of the problems is, even in years when we get a normal snowpack in the headwaters, the runoff may be well below average. So that top year, 2020, snowpack was 105% of the 30-year average, but runoff was only 61%. Because it's getting warmer earlier, and the soils are drier, and not as much is flowing down. So it's a big issue. And this I just put in last night because it was actually just in my inbox yesterday. We have an organization called the Family Farm Alliance, very active in the West. They put up an issue alert. They put these out regularly. And this was dated yesterday, standing up for Colorado River agriculture. And as said here, as the negotiations, we're trying to figure out how to share the burden of the reduced flows. That's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to share shortage. And we're in the process of renegotiating, we meaning all of the states in the United States and the federal government. And they want to ensure that irrigated agriculture remains a central pillar in the conversation in the basin's future. And they talk about the importance of irrigated agriculture. Parts of Arizona produce 90% of the leafy green vegetables that are eaten in the United States, and Canada in the winter months. And then it says, the unified message of the Colorado River Basin agriculture is simple. Our food system depends on the enduring productivity of irrigated agriculture. Keeping water on farms isn't just good policy, it's a matter of food security. This is common to themes that were discussed yesterday in the 10 o'clock session. So drilling down now a little bit to Arizona, these are our water supplies that serve the state. Interestingly, our state has been a rapidly growing state, but in the last 50 or so years, we're using basically the same quantity of water that we did 50 years ago. Agriculture's gotten more efficient. We've urbanized a lot. Cities are not using more water than they did in the past because of more efficient appliances and practices. But then if you look at the utilization on the side, it really mirrors what's going on globally. About 70% or a little more is extracted or diverted by agriculture. So we've got groundwater is important, Colorado River, and some other surface supplies. And I put up this slide yesterday, and I wanted to go into this a little bit more to give you a flavor of kind of what the picture looks like in Arizona. We have what I call some different important zones. This map is a map that my water center produces, needs to be updated a little bit, but those green areas that I've circled in green, those are the agricultural areas in the state. And the water supplies and the activities differ quite a bit, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining that to you. So the Yuma area, which is in the southwestern part of the state, it's very close to the border with Mexico. That's the area. You have very large-scale agriculture. It's all irrigated. They get very little rainfall, maybe 4 inches a year. They have very senior rights to Colorado River water, so they're not as impacted by some of these cutbacks due to the lower flows on the Colorado River. And in the winter months, they grow these vegetables. So they have the advantage of labor. They have the advantage of day labor and some longer-term labor that comes over the border from Mexico every day. And that's really important because having the labor power for agriculture is an issue. Having the workforce is an issue. There they've got it, and they're producing high-value leafy greens in the winter, and they're doing some of the forage crops and others over the summer months, where it's very, very hot. Elevation there is like sea level, maybe even in some areas a little bit below sea level. Now, the Colorado River Indian Tribes area, that's an indigenous community. They've been settled there since time immemorial. Their lands actually are on both sides of the Colorado River. So part of it's in Arizona, part of it's in the state of California, but most of their irrigated agriculture is in Arizona. They have a large quantity of water available to them and very senior rights per court decrees. But they are far from some of the labor supply. They're at least 90 minutes north of Yuma, which is already 25 minutes, 30 minutes north of the border with Mexico. And so they're growing not those high-value leafy green vegetables. They don't have the labor for that. They don't have the vertical integration of the vegetable processing and cooling and all that. So they're growing alfalfa, cotton, and other crops. They also have much older infrastructure because they're dependent on the Bureau of Indian Affairs to upgrade it. There's lots of demand for funds for that. And so they've been involved in efforts to try to reduce their water consumption through implementation of drip irrigation. There's a new drip technology that is really gravity fed. It doesn't require the pressure that the subsurface irrigation requires. And so that picture on the top right is a picture of them growing cotton with this surface tape that's applied. It's called N-drip. It's a newer drip technology. And so they're trying to figure out how they can use less water so that they could be compensated for their conserved water, and that reduced water can be left in Lake Mead or used by others, because again, we have this problem of shortage and figuring out how we can optimize what is a not optimal situation of reduced flows. So very different. They're doing a lot with drip and maybe some changing crop patterns. Now, central Arizona is where there's a big story, and it's not one of water abundance. There, in central Arizona, by the way, I'm talking about basically Tucson or north of Tucson up to the Phoenix area. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States nowadays. And so you have very urbanized population. But in between Tucson, where I live, which is a metropolitan area of about 1 million people, Phoenix is a metropolitan area of about 4+ million people, you have a very historically agricultural area. It's being suburbanized and urbanized over time. Historically, they relied on groundwater. It's fossil groundwater. Groundwater levels were declining. The Central Arizona Project, which was built to convey water from the Colorado River, and again, I didn't put the numbers in here where I have it in kilometers, and I don't remember the kilometers, but it's 336 miles uphill from the river to get to Central Arizona. And so in the mid-1990s, the surface water became available to the farmers, but they have a much lower priority to that water. And with the reduced Colorado River flows, much of their surface water now has been curtailed. They do not get surface water deliveries. And so what they're having to do is go back on groundwater, but that requires some investment because over a 20 or more year period, they were relying more on surface water and they built the distribution system dependent on that surface water. And so they're having some pain right now. The photo on the upper right is one I took years ago of some cantaloupe fields with drip irrigation, subsurface drip. Now they're mostly growing alfalfa there because the dairies are located nearby and the cows need the food. And so there's a lot of alfalfa growth there. There's also land fallowing going on because they don't have sufficient water to irrigate as many lands. And that photo on the right is one I took from an airplane on my way from Tucson to Phoenix to catch another plane. So just to give you an idea, it's very dry desert. If there were not irrigation, there would not be green. Now, I want to say a little bit more about what's going on in the kind of central Arizona part of Arizona. Besides the Colorado River, we have a very important in-state river system called the Salt River Project. And this project was one of the first large-scale damming project of our U.S. Bureau of Reclamation at the early time of the 1900s, the 20th century. And so their watershed is all within the state of Arizona. So unlike the Colorado River watershed, where it's 7 states in the US, their watershed is green, and then their surface area is that gray area that's in the middle. But that's where all the people are, those 4 million people that I mentioned in the Phoenix area. And this is a blow up of the service area. The gray shows the different parts. It's not all continuous. It's not all continuous. Even within a city like Phoenix, some areas getting Salt River Project water, some not. This is where, like I said, more than half of the people in the state of Arizona live. Arizona is home to about 7+ million people, maybe 7.3 million people. But it's a very urbanized state. They're concentrated in some of the urban areas. But this is a slide I wanted to share with you because urbanization is something being experienced, of course, around the world. This slide only goes back to 1972. And in 1972, it showed about 60% of the land, of the water deliveries were for agricultural purposes. If you went back to the early part of the 1900s, it would have been over 90%. I didn't have a graph to show that. But by 2021, if you go over here, it's down to under 10%. So a system that started out with over 90% of its water supplies going to agriculture has ended up being over 90% going to community use. And so that is something that is really affecting agriculture in our state and will affect central Arizona more as well, is that first you had basically all agriculture. This is a slide Salt River Project used when they guest lectured in my class a few years ago. Then you see houses right next to the agriculture, and then you see basically no agriculture. And so highly urbanized area. So in our state, we have what are called active management areas, which is this pinkish orange color. And these are areas where groundwater is regulated. Because what happened with after post-World War II and the advent of high-capacity pumps, air conditioning, There's a lot more pumping of groundwater. It was fossil groundwater, and the state realized in 1980 it had to do something to manage this groundwater. And so these areas that are mostly the urban areas, and then in the bottom right corner, you see a couple that are brand new active management areas, is where there's been groundwater regulation. Where you have these AMAs, there's conservation requirements, there's quantified rights, it's got a lot of complication to it. And the footprint of agriculture cannot expand. And so you look at what was the historical footprint of agriculture over the last 5 years before an AMA was formed, and you can't bring new lands into agricultural production. So there's a limit. That's one of the ways they're limiting the water use, the groundwater use for agriculture in these active management areas. Then I have a couple blue areas shown. Those are areas that are called irrigation non-expansion areas. They are literally what the words say. Agriculture can't expand there either, but there aren't other groundwater regulations. But what is notable is all the land that I haven't colored here, that is not colored here on this map. There is basically no groundwater regulation at all, other than you need to file a notice of intent to drill a well, and there's registration of wells. But there's no groundwater regulation, yet in many of these areas, if you look at this and compare this to a map that I showed earlier, those teal green areas on that lower right map are areas that depend 75% or more on groundwater. So on pumped water. Some areas depend 100% on pumped water. And then the other areas, there's still quite a bit of dependence on groundwater. Many of these areas are agricultural rural areas, and there's no regulation. So that's an issue that I'll say a little bit more about in the next couple of slides. So the last of those 4 circled areas I want to mention is an area called Cochise County. So in the United States, states are typically divided into counties, and then you have cities and counties. And Arizona has 15 counties. A state like Texas, if you're familiar with Texas, has hundreds of counties. We don't have hundreds of counties, we have 15. Cochise County is in the southeastern portion of the state, highly reliant on groundwater, and they have problems there due to overdrafting of groundwater, and there is real damage to lands being done. There's fissuring and subsidence and all kinds of issues, such that the state of Arizona formed 2 new active management areas. This map, one of the reasons we need to update it is because the map only shows the Douglas AMA, and a new one was formed just north of there, the Wilcox AMA. And so there's limited supply of groundwater, and the agricultural footprint cannot expand. But what do we do in our state in these areas where they're relying on fossil groundwater? The conditions are not such. There have to be certain statutory conditions met to form an active management area. What should we do to try to manage that groundwater well so that we can preserve the agricultural activity, the livelihoods of the communities dependent on agriculture? We don't want to create ghost towns, right? I mean, we do have a few ghost towns in Arizona where there used to be mining activity, and there's not mineral mining activity anymore. What to do about that? And by the way, the photos there on the right show a chili grower. We have a very prominent chili breeder, seed breeder, Mr. Ed Curry, and he grows chilies in that part of the state. And he's doing some things to become more efficient. And at the same time, because there are no regulations, dairies from the northern part of the United States have come in, and they're putting in tremendously high capacity pumps that are pulling out water at very high rates from an aquifer that's not being replenished at anywhere near the rate at which it's being used. So there's a struggle about what to do about groundwater management in these areas. Oops. So I'm going to come back to that in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about a report. It's available online if anybody wants to look at it, but our university president a few years ago, he's not our university president anymore, decided to create a commission looking at the future of agriculture and food production in a drying climate. There were a ton of us on it, not all experts in water or agriculture, just brought a group of 10 thinking people together. And we put this report together. It's not a very long one. We talked about what were the threats and what might our university do to contribute to addressing some of the challenges. Because, again, as noted yesterday, we kind of all know what the problems are. What we really want to be doing is focusing on the solutions, right? That's where we're going to get, that's where our future is. And so what are the threats? Growing food with less water in a hotter climate, and you've got the soil issues that are associated with the reduced availability of water and the quality of the water and so forth. You've got to deal with the socioeconomic and cultural concerns. People wonder, why are we growing crops in the desert? And as our Department of Agriculture, State Department of Agriculture director likes to say, we grow in the desert, not in spite of the desert, but because of it. These are year-round growing conditions. In certain areas, the soils are actually wonderful for growing. But there are impediments to making change, to adapting to these new circumstances. And we have siloed, inflexible policies, lack of systems thinking, R&D investment. These are where we have to overcome some of these challenges. And so we had 5 recommendations. The first 2 have to do with things we at the university could do to be more effective and efficient in the way we do things. And the third one also is have some of our university-operated centers and farming areas become more technology and innovation hubs than they already may be. Expand partnerships with tribal agriculture. That map in the upper right shows in the goldish color all the lands that are tribal lands. And in fact, in the state of Arizona, 15 to 18% of the lands are privately owned. The rest is tribal, federal, state. We don't have a lot of privately owned lands. And then establish new and strengthen existing collaborations with institutions in arid regions and around the world. And so something like this with global connections and sharing information and learning, these are very important options. And there's another arroyo I show there about water resilience from an indigenous perspective, because we can learn from our indigenous colleagues. All right, so one of the things we're doing, this is not really related to that commission, but agriculture is very important to the state of Arizona. Our governor, our legislature is very much supportive of agricultural activity and doing what it can within limited budgets to strengthen. So one of the things it did was create an ag efficiency incentive program. This was started just a couple of years ago, and rather than have it administered by the state agency for agriculture, they came to the University of Arizona to cooperative extension that again bridges the academic and non-academic to administer this program of water efficiency grants. And the idea is, if people are resistant to change, if change is costly, let's see if we can incentivize the producers to make some changes. So the idea is that there could be up to $1,500 US per acre to support the infrastructure costs to put in pressurized spray or drip irrigation to replace flood irrigation. And university personnel are administering the grant funds and are providing analysis of the results. Now, one of the things I would be remiss if I did not at least acknowledge is that water cycle that I mentioned earlier, because as you make agriculture more efficient, it's not like all that water that agriculture was applying to the lands is used consumptively, right? Some of it seeps down and some of it actually recharges the aquifers. So if you start, having less of that seepage, that recharge of the aquifers, then that has an implication for the groundwater that others may be using nearby. So I just need to mention that for completeness. And as of March 2025, these were the numbers for what was expected to be spent in total: $61 million, over $61 million US dollars. Some of it coming from a federal grant, some of it coming from our state legislature, and then there was a match requirement. So $16.5 million expected from the private sector. And those little symbols there show the different counties and areas where investments have been made. It's being viewed as a very successful effort to date. We'll see, and again, the university will be doing analysis on the results. Now, again, where are there opportunities for universities to collaborate, to help innovate? And this is something that came out of, again, that president's report on opportunities for global leadership to work together. And this is a slide from Biosphere 2. And I don't know if have any of you heard about Biosphere 2? It's really known around the world. It's where some people thought they were going to go into the second biosphere and isolate themselves for a period of time and produce all their food and everything they needed. That kind of turned out to be a bit of a bust, but the facilities are there and they're being used for innovative research and controlled environment type research. And to the left of this photo is an agrivoltaic site that Professor Greg Barron-Gafford, who's a leader in that globally, where you put the solar panels over agricultural fields. And there's synergies there. You end up getting better crop production because you have shade. The crops help cool the solar panels. And one thing we have a lot of in Arizona is sun. We have a lot of sun, yes. And sometimes there's a question, why don't we have more solar energy there? And so the idea of combining solar power with agriculture is an important one. And so we're doing things in partnership, again, collaboration. The university is involved with a joint institute for food, water, and energy security. We're working with the very desert region in Israel, to the south of Israel. This photo in the upper left shows Greg in the blue shirt with an agrivoltaic pergola in the desert there. We have an installation in Kenya, that's taking really a rural community and helping them become more productive in their agriculture and so forth, have some power generated, and it's so far looking to be very, very successful. Again, the similarities of the regions on the upper right is a photo taken in Israel, in that desert region, and then the photo again of Mr. Curry's fields or other fields. You couldn't hardly tell where they're being taken. They're so similar. All right, so what, in summary, are some of the impacts to agriculture from the water supply challenges? In central Arizona in particular, the farmers are having to adjust to less Colorado River water availability. They are looking at different crops, such as a rubber substitute, waiuli, which Bridgestone, which is a big tire company, is helping with some experiments. It's a very different type of crop. It takes multiple years till you can harvest it. There's a lot of land fallowing, which I also mentioned, because they just couldn't replace, quantity-wise, the surface water they've lost with groundwater in a short time. These cutbacks have occurred just since 2021 or so. I mentioned the groundwater and investment. There's interest in farmlands for future urban suburban development, but pace of development is uncertain, even with recent legislation that I don't have time to go into. And there's interest in farmlands for solar development. The Yuma area is expected to continue to focus on its leafy green vegetables. Maybe they'll enter into some arrangements to kind of lease some of the water on a short-term basis. We shall see. The farming is expected to continue on tribal lands, but there too they're looking how to become more efficient, how to grow high-valued crops. And those groundwater changes that I mentioned, the management changes in certain areas where new active management areas are being formed, they're not necessarily the best approach for these other areas that weren't colored on that map. And this is where the people and policy and politics come in, is that most people agree there's something that needs to be done, but they can't decide what. And so we've had a bit of a stalemate at our legislature to try to figure out how to approach management of these rural communities. And there are opportunities to implement more efficient irrigation practices. So innovation plus collaboration is leading to adaptation to these changing conditions. People may get a little frustrated at times about the speed, but it is happening, and it is taking a lot of people coming together. So my final slide, and I'm just about out of time, I put here just in case I had a slide. There is a lot about people part of this. It is about, a lot of times the engineering's known, you might even have the money, there might not be the money. But what it takes is people coming together. And this is a list of factors that I've put together as factors that contribute to coming up with successful outcomes. And in this case, it's in a transboundary setting, work related to US-Mexico. And the one I wanted to point out, I want to point out two. One is mutual respect contributing to trust. It's really, really important for people to trust each other. And that is derived from mutual respect, communication, listening to each other. But then the other part, the number 6 I want to mention, is eating with your partners or your potential partners. That's how you come together and you get to know people and maybe build that trust. And then additional factors, one of them is sharing lessons learned, positive and negative. I hope my sharing some of the lessons and activities is useful to you. And with that, I'd like to thank you. My email address is up there if you want to write it down. If you want to contact me, I can send you a link to the PDF of the presentation if you want to get to any of those QR codes. And I thank you very much.
Very, very good presentation, full of details, and it's just a summary of a lot of work, a lot of years of work. So thank you very much. And well, I have only one question, because you are a leader in terms of water diplomacy, as you asked here. And I have a very funny, but I think good question is, which is easier to confront? Two countries with armies and mad politicians, or angry farmers?
Oh, I don't think I'm going to take a chance and answer that question. I will say, though, that one tends to come across angry people more than armies and tanks, and so you just got to be prepared. And I think the key thing is for people to build that trust, and that's not as hard as, I think, combating an army tank.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so angry farmers are better than angry politicians. Well, thank you very much. I think it was a very good summary of a very big amount of work, and in a very, very hard place for water. I think the people that put the name in that state, Arizona in Spanish is a dry area, it's a good name for that region, and it's a lot of work to manage a very scarce resource in that area. So thank you for your work and your presentation.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you all.